Today we're back in the garden to talk with Mark Turner about some wildlife that we might be finding more in our lawn this time. Moles and gophers. They might literally be popping up this summer, right?
That's right, that's right.
So can you help us identify the difference, first of all, between a mole and a gopher?
That's right. So here in Oklahoma, we have the eastern mole, and then we actually have two different species of pocket gopher. But again, the recognition of the type of damage they cause and the control methods don't really matter by species.
Okay.
And so generally with moles, you're going to see damage from both the mounds. They're going to have a more symmetrical round that's shaped almost like a mountain.
Okay.
There's generally going to be fewer mounds, but what a lot of the damage comes from with moles is seeing the tunnels. And so you'll see strips of dead grass that just look like a tunnel. They might lead to and from the mounds. And so those are just foraging areas. The moles are actually eating insects and earthworms and grubs under the ground.
Okay.
So I tell folks, don't necessarily jump to controlling them automatically. You know, if it's in an area that you can put up with some of that damage, they can provide some great pest control. They also aerate the soil and help with soil fertility.
Okay.
But if they are causing damage, there's certainly ways that we can help with that. For pocket gophers, you're generally going to see more mounds just because they're usually in a little bit larger populations compared to moles, which tend to be a little bit more solitary. Pocket gophers, the mounds themselves are the primary cause of damage. You'll also see some damage from them eating roots of plants as well as leaves of plants.
Okay, so
certainly,
they will eat our plants.
Exactly.
Okay.
So they can directly eat the plants.
Okay.
And so most of the time, the easiest way to identify pocket gopher mounds as opposed to moles are with pocket gophers, those mounds on top of the ground are going to be more fan-shaped, so they're a little bit less symmetrical. And you'll also see a plug of dirt where that pocket gopher has essentially plugged his tunnel. Mm-hmm. And so if you look, you'll see a little cylinder that's usually depressed underneath the top level of that mound.
Okay.
And that's a telltale sign that that's a pocket gopher. And so that will then tell you what kind of control methods and specifically what kind of traps you might want to use to control it.
Okay, and are the gopher moles typically a little bit larger? Because it's a larger animal usually, right? Is that...
They can be a little bit larger. I wouldn't go by size,
Okay.
though. I typically am just thinking about the shape of it. And then if it has that plug, that's a telltale sign. It's not a mole, it's a gopher.
All right. Now, and so, you know, a lot of times they can cause problems, especially in something like an area where we're wanting recreation, right? Whether it's a public park or your yard, you're running, and you can turn an ankle on those holes, right?
That's right.
So how do, you know, yes, they're maybe beneficial eating some of those grub worms, but how do we get rid of these if they're causing a problem?
So with either one, they're causing problems. We don't recommend repellents. Those are generally ineffective. There's a lot of them on the market, but we generally don't recommend that. The primary thing that I recommend for both is going to be trapping.
Okay.
But again, you need to pick your type of trap based on what you have. So it's really important to identify which animal is causing problems.
Yeah.
For moles, we're typically going to think about using harpoon traps or scissor style traps. Most folks use harpoon traps. They're relatively easy to set on the soil surface, just right over the tunnel. Mm-hmm. But you can also, again, use a scissor style trap that would go in the tunnel itself.
Okay.
For gophers, we're oftentimes going to use a spring style trap, and that actually goes down into the tunnel itself. So you'll have to dig the tunnel out and then put the trap in and then cover that tunnel back over, because if the gopher's going along and he recognizes, oh, there's sunlight here, he's not going to go there anymore.
Okay.
They're trying to stay underground, to stay hidden from predators, and that's also where they're foraging. And so those you're generally going to, you know, either trap you're going to have to check daily, and you know, I just recommend continue trapping until you see the damage stop, or you stop catching animals, and at that point you can obviously, you know, smooth things out and reseed those parts of your lawn that were damaged.
So if you've caught one mole, you might have caught the culprit, but you might be catching more than one gopher, right?
Correct. You know, I certainly would say just keep an eye on things if you catch one.
Okay.
Because again, you might only have one, but if you've got a bunch of mounds all over the place and it's gophers, you may have to catch more than that. There are some poisons that you can use, but I generally don't recommend those, especially for folks that are going to be working around areas where maybe their pets are going, or they have kids that might be using those areas. You know, for people just working in their garden or around their home, trapping is very effective, and you know, it's just a safer way to do things and not fool with the poisons.
Well, and I guess I've heard traps are one of the best ways to go also, but one of the key things is getting it in the right place, right? So how do we know where there's active tunnels to put those traps?
That's right. So generally what I'll recommend folks do is to actually go and depress some of those tunnel areas, especially with moles. This works very well.
Okay.
And if you go out the next day and see that they've opened it back up, then you know that it's being used frequently. With gophers, generally, you're gonna wanna place it around active tunnels, but most of the time with gophers, I'm just gonna recommend getting several traps, just putting it in the area with the freshest damage, and then, you know, putting several traps in those areas. That's gonna be the best way to catch them.
Okay, is there certain environments that favor these versus others, like, you know, irrigation?
Right. So certainly you might see irrigation helping things, especially with moles. You could see them maybe moving into an area where irrigation is promoting more grubs. But generally, especially with pocket gophers, the soil texture is gonna have the biggest influence. They really like those areas with more sandy soil, you know, that more coarse soil for them to dig in, as opposed to areas with a little bit, you know, finer soil.
So of course, soil texture doesn't change that readily in a yard. So if you've had gophers, you're likely going to have to experience them again, maybe?
That's exactly right, yeah. If you know that you've had them in an area, you're much more likely to see them come into that area again. You know, certainly the control methods that we have are good, but be vigilant, and, you know, if you don't want to have them in an area, it's best to take care of them early on after you detect them.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing this information with us.
Absolutely.
We hope you enjoyed this video as part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on the OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.